instructed the Bureau of Public Health Services Office of the DOH to file with FDA for issuance of an emergency use authorization.
This is the pathway na tinitignan namin ngayon for Sinopharm. Baka pwedeng dito na rin kami dadaan, mas magiging mabilis ang proseso. But of course, as I've said, we still go through the usual regulatory process.
Those were the country's health officials wanting to speed up the granting of emergency use authorization for Sinopharm by applying for the EUA themselves.
This comes on the heels of the World Health Organization granting the China-made vaccine an emergency use listing. Good evening, I'm Gretchen Ho.
And I'm Robbie Alampa. You're watching The Big Story. We start tonight with China's state-owned pharmaceutical firm Sinopharm. It secured emergency use listing for its COVID-19 vaccine from the World Health Organization.
That prompted health officials to personally work on Sinopharm's emergency use authorization to expedite possible vaccine supply deals. Greg Gregorio has the big story.
The World Health Organization has approved the emergency use of Sinopharm's COVID-19 vaccine. It's the first China-made shot to be included in the WHO's emergency use listing. Data show that a two-dose vaccine has 79% efficacy and is recommended to be used among those aged 18 to 59.
Kapag sinasabing nasa emergency use list ng WHO, ibig sabihin it went through a very rigorous regulatory process.
Here in the Philippines, Sinopharm has no EUA yet, but limited use is allowed under a compassionate special permit. Health Secretary Francisco Duque III now wants the Food and Drug Administration to expedite its emergency use approval of the China-made vaccine. The catch? It's not that state-run pharmaceutical firm, but our Department of Health that will do the legwork.
I have already instructed the Bureau of Public Health Services Office of the DOH to file with FDA for issuance of an emergency use authorization.
Once the EUA is granted, the government will no longer need to return some 1,000 doses donated by the vaccine maker as ordered by President Duterte. Recall that no less than Duterte received backlash for taking Sinopharm's vaccine even without an EUA. The DOH says they are still working with the WHO and the Finance Department to complete the documents.
This is the pathway na tinitignan namin ngayon for Sinopharm. Baka pwedeng dito na rin kami dadaan, mas magiging mabilis ang proseso. But of course, as I've said, we still go through the usual regulatory process.
Meanwhile, the distribution of additional AstraZeneca shots that arrived over the weekend has started. Metro Manila, Central Luzon, and Calabarzon will receive the biggest allocation. More jabs from Sputnik V, AstraZeneca and COVAX facility are scheduled to arrive in the coming weeks. For News 5, Greg Gregorio, we are One News.
But why is the Philippine government processing the Chinese drug maker's EUA on its behalf? To let us know the rationale behind the move, we have on the line Health Undersecretary Maria Rosario Berhere. Yusek Berhere, bakit nga po? Is the premise here that neither the pharmaceutical nor its distributors here, if any, have applied? And if so, bakit ang gobyerno ang mag-a-apply on their behalf?
Yes, no. So good evening, Robbie. No. So actually, we have two manufacturers or two distributors here in the country which have signified their intent to apply long before, no, last year pa. And up until now, we had been waiting, but no application yet. So ngayon, with the negotiations being done through our vaccine czar, meron pong pathway na tinitignan na baka maging government to government ang negosasyon. So kapag ganito, para lang po mapabilis natin, we are undertaking this kind of pathway where the government will apply for the EUA. Kailangan nung maintindihan ng ating mga kababayan na dun po sa batas at sa polisiya na meron tayo ngayon, pinapayagan naman po ang gobyerno through the Department of Health na mag-procure, mag-EUA, no? Mag-apply for the Emergency Use Authority. Nagawa na po natin ito dati when we had our COVAX facility EUA para dun sa mga bakuna ng COVAX at saka dun sa donated vaccines ng Sinovac po.
Okay, but is that necessarily avoiding any conflict given that the FDA to whom you will apply is a unit under the DOH?
It conducts its independent evaluation. We have to look at the very objective of this purpose or the objective of this undertaking. It would be for us to facilitate more vaccines that will come into the country. And this will be done, as I've said, through government-to-government negotiations. That's why we are triggering or initiating this kind of undertaking like applying for the EUA so that we can facilitate the process.
Okay, Yusek Vergere, if you don't mind, may pahabol na question lang po yung news desk namin. No? As per Dr. Paz Corrales of DOH NCR, around 2 million AstraZeneca doses daw are set to expire in June and July. Is this necessarily cause for concern?
There is a strategy already that has been recommended by Secretary Galvez, our vaccine czar. So when we have received these vaccines, alam naman po natin na meron tayong expiring ng June and July. Pinag-usapan po ng maayos at ang utos nga po, ibigay na po natin ng initial doses itong mag-expire ng June and bigyan na rin po yung dapat na nakaschedule for second doses. Total 12 weeks naman po ang pagitan ng bawat interval. We will still be awaiting the upcoming AstraZeneca vaccines that will be delivered in the country. So we don't see any issue here because we know that we still have AstraZeneca vaccines coming. So all of these vaccine doses will be given as a first dose to all of those eligible population.
Okay. Health Undersecretary Maria Rosario Vergere, maraming salamat po. The country is receiving more vaccine doses from the WHO-led COVAX facility. Tonight's big number is 2 million. That is the number of AstraZeneca vaccines that arrived in the country over the weekend. This is the biggest single shipment of COVID-19 shots to the Philippines so far. The latest supply brings the total vaccines delivered to the country to more than 7.5 million. The first batch of Pfizer vaccines from the COVAX facility are also expected to arrive tonight with more than 190,000 doses.
These are the other big stories tonight. Never mind the health scare over COVID-19, hundreds flock to the Caloocan Resort and Baseco Beach to beat the summer heat. Doctors warn, however, these are super spreader events. Authorities and the Nayong Filipino Foundation lock horns over plans to construct a mega-vaccination site in the Parañaque Park. And the country just had its 8th Olympic contender. Rower Cris Nievarez finally puts an end to the rowing team's 20-year drought in the Summer Games. These big stories after the break.
Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay. Scorching heat prompted hundreds of NCR residents to defy health protocols and go swimming over the weekend. But experts are warning public pools could be super spreaders of COVID-19. Jenny Dongon with the details.
Crowded swimming pools, mask-less visitors. This was how Mother's Day looked like at the Gubat sa Ciudad Resort in Caloocan. Never mind that non-essential and leisure activities are prohibited in MECQ areas. Hundreds, including kids, flocked to the resort, seemingly unaware of COVID-19 health risk.
Hindi ba alam na bawal pa mag-swimming?
Ha?
Hindi ba alam?
Hindi, body lang po itong kuya birthday. Mother's Day po ngayon, di ba kuya?
Pero okay pag Mother's Day. Pero bawal pa kasi mag-swimming ma'am eh.
Hindi po, Mother's Day po kasi kuya.
In Manila, health protocols were also brushed aside as residents frolicked at the Baseco Beach on Sunday. The Environment Department and the local government has been warning that its waters are still polluted and not safe for swimming. Visitors say they wanted to cool off from the unbearable summer heat and the lack of water in some of their homes.
Wala kasing tulo ron sa amin, boss eh.
Ano walang tulo?
Walang anong tubig. Mainit kasi, mainit. Okay naman, hindi naman masyadong marumi.
The country experienced extremely hot temperatures on Sunday, with many areas across the country recording temperatures of over 40 degrees Celsius. Despite this, an expert strongly warns against swimming in public pools or beaches as they may be super COVID-19 spreaders.
Siyempre, kung close contact, like for example, bagong dura, tapos nalunon mo bigla, yun, siyempre hindi pa man nag-work ang chlorine doon. Yung volume, we don't expect din na automatic na mapapatay ng chlorine yung virus or bacteria.
Those tempted to go swimming due to the extreme hot weather are advised to make the most of the water supply they have at home.
Siguro, magbuhos na lang tayo ng tubig sa tabo at batya. Shower na lang tayo sa ating bathroom. Pwede tayong magbabad ng katawan sa drum. Mas malaki po ang magiging problema natin pag tayo po ay nagkasakit.
The Health Department has advised its regional offices to monitor those who went to Gubat sa syudad to ask them to quarantine for 14 days. For News 5, Jenny Dongon, We Are One News.
The Octa Research Group sees a downward trend in cases in the capital region, but the group still cautions against easing restrictions next week. In today's Laging Handa briefing, Octa fellows noted how average daily attack rate remains high in most Metro Manila cities. ICU occupancy rates in the nearby provinces of Rizal and Laguna also have yet to reach ideal levels. Areas outside Luzon, mainly Cagayan de Oro, Puerto Princesa, and Bacolod, have also seen slight increases in their number of cases. Octa says there is still a need to sustain the gains made.
We will support whatever government decides. Okay, what we're suggesting is caution. What we're suggesting is a calibrated, slow, exit strategy, so that we can sustain the trends.
Time for an express look at some of the day's big stories. 2 more of the 12 COVID-positive seafarers from MV Athens Bridge were transferred to the hospital. The 2 have difficulty breathing but are not in critical condition. Last Friday, 2 other crewmen were hospitalized. 9 others who are not infected are still aboard the vessel and will disembark on Friday. Vaccine czar Carlito Galvez has urged the Nayong Filipino Foundation to approve the construction of a mega-vaccination site in its Parañaque property. The NPF had earlier raised concerns over its possible damage to the ecosystem. It also questioned allowing ports and gaming tycoon Enrique Razon to oversee the project. The palace said NPF must think of the country's welfare. And the armed forces are now on the hunt for the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters, or BIFF, after occupying a Maguindanao market. AFP Chief of Staff Cirilito Sobejana accused over 20 BIFF members of being a scripted group. Sobejana also cited civilian accounts that about 4 BIFF members were injured after a firefight with the military. He reported 0 deaths or property damage. Now for the big story in sports. With the green light from Congress, it's just a matter of time before Ange Kwame becomes a fully fledged Filipino. Once all the nitty-gritty details are finished, Kwame may have the chance to don the Gilas jersey for the first time during the final window of the FIBA Asia Cup qualifiers. The Philippines is set to host the final window after several cancellations due to the pandemic.
I've been learning
most of my basketball career here in the Philippines, and it's something that really it helped me as a player individually. So yeah, you can say I am a Filipino product basketball.
Speaking of Filipino pride, 30 Ravenna is set to return for another tour of duty with the San Neo Phoenix after signing a contract extension with the team. Ravenna and San En announced that this was a multi-year extension. He signed with the Japanese club team last year under the Asian Player Quota program. But the Ateneo star only played 18 games after suffering injuries and testing positive for COVID-19. Ravenna says that he has some unfinished business as he looks to improve on his first pro season. Time for another quick break. When we return, the Anti-Insurgency Task Force makes the case as to why their budget should stay amid growing calls to defund the agency. And another Pinoy will banner the Philippine flag in the Tokyo Olympic Games. Meet the young rower after the break.
Good evening, I'm Robbie Alampay. You're still watching The Big Story. The NTF-ELCAC is trying to beat back calls for its defunding, claiming it has liberated at least 800 barangays from communist influence. Mobile journalist Stanley Gahete will give us a front seat to this story.
We have called for this. A total of 822 barangays have been liberated from communist rebels' influence. This was what Esperon told in a press conference where he opposed moves in Congress to defund the NTF-ELCAC. The task force needed the funds to develop these liberated barangays so the rebels will not return.
For over half a century, the CPP, NPA, NDF has taken advantage of communities by exploiting gaps in governance.
Esperon reiterated the objectives and intentions of NTF-ELCAC to help the communities in their social development through their barangay development program. Esperon emphasized that the Tatag communities are now in the process of transformation from being conflict-vulnerable barangays to areas of peace and empowerment.
We wish to inform the public that as of May 4, 2021, 10.68 billion pesos or 65% of the BDP have been released to 712 out of the 822 barangay recipients identified for the program.
With this, NTF-ELCAC strengthened its lineup of spokesperson system.
These 8 spokespersons come from the different agencies. The designation of officials under the expanded pool of spokespersons allows for a focused discourse and engagement.
NTF-ELCAC sees that there is no problem with red tagging.
People have to be informed so that they are aware of the danger. Hindi po berdugo ang NTF-ELCAC, no? Bagkus ito ay isang paraan para sinasabi ng ating pamahalaan na magsama-sama tayo.
Stanley Gahete, We Are One News.
Let's take a look at the biggest stories on print and online. From the free man, 2 doctors who attended to the late Cebu Town Mayor Marlon Garcia last year are now being charged for reckless imprudence resulting to homicide. The Cebu City Prosecutor's Office took into account the opinion of an infectious disease expert hired by the Garcia family. It detailed that their medical care did not meet acceptable standards. Economists expect growth to decline once again for the first quarter of the year after stricter lockdowns were reimposed. A poll by Business World showed first quarter GDP is expected to contract by 2.6%, slower than the preceding quarter's decline of 8.3%, but still worse from the same period last year. This projection would mark the fifth straight quarter of decline for the economy if realized. The Commission on Elections sees no reason to delay the 2022 elections despite the pandemic. News 5 reports that the COMELEC is set to release a new normal election manual that will set the guidelines for next year's polls. COMELEC Commissioner Antonio Co says only 5 persons will be allowed per precinct at a time. Voting hours will also likely be extended but must be finished within the day.
And here are the other big stories from around the world. The death toll from a bomb attack outside a school in the Afghan capital of Kabul has risen to 68. Most of the victims were schoolgirls. A car bomb was detonated in the front of the Syed al-Shuhada school, and 2 more bombs exploded when students rushed out in panic. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack, not even the Taliban. Officials said doctors are currently struggling to care for 165 injured victims. And Palestinian protesters clashed with the Israeli police outside the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem over the weekend. Footage of clashes showed Palestinian protesters throwing rocks and Israeli police firing stun grenades and rubber bullets. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society said more than 180 Palestinians were injured in the violence.
A historic day in sports. Philippine rowing returns to the Olympics after 20 long years as Cris Nievarez successfully books a slot for the Tokyo Summer Games. How does he plan to suit up against the world's best? Find out in my report.
Yun po, parang nag-flashback lahat ng mula nung nag-umpisa po ako sa rowing. Yung lahat ng pinaghirapan ng rowing para maabot po yung Olympic ulit after 20 years po.
It's history in the making. After 20 long years, the country is now back on the Olympic rowing stage. And 21-year-old Cris Nievarez will be holding the bow for the country. He may have finished 9th overall in the qualifiers, but with his other competitors already having secured their Olympic slots, Cris moved up in the rankings, thus clinching an Olympic berth.
Na-imagine mo ba na maa-achieve mo to sa ganyang edad na 21 years old?
Hindi po, kasi ang ano po talaga ng rowing, yung karamihan po talaga 10 years bago ma-achieve yung ganun. Tapos ako na-achieve ko siya lang 5.5 years lang po.
Benji Tolentino, the last Filipino rower to reach the Olympics, says he couldn't be prouder of Cris's historic feat.
Tawag namin sa kanya Big Boy kasi siya yung sa pinakamaliit pero siya yung malaki yung puso. Umpisa pa lang to, marami pang susunod. Kaya advice ko sa kanya, enjoy niya.
After the team's quarantine, Cris will be back in training. Philippine rowing team's Uzbekistan coach Shukrat Ganyev will be returning to help Cris prepare.
Ngayon pa lang, Carlo, ay talagang pinakuha ko na yung ergometer sa lamesa dam. Ayoko mabakante siya ng training. Expected namin na darating na rin si Coach Ganyev para matulungan na kami at matutukan itong si Cris Nievarez.
May panahon pa po mag-prepare para sa Olympics. Siguro yung klima kasi sa Japan medyo malamig, tapos yung dating ng hangin niya karamihan headwinds. Mas maganda po yun kasi na-experience ko na yung tubig. Ganun.
With the Olympic berth, Philippine rowing president Patrick Gregorio says the future of the sport is looking bright.
We're thankful to all the sponsors and we're so proud of Cris. You know, he comes from a humble family, very young man. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And once again, MVPSF, Philippine Sports Commission, POC, Maynila then Smart. Maraming salamat po sa inyong paniniwala.
Cris is the 8th Pinoy athlete that has qualified for the 2021 Tokyo Olympics. He will be joining weightlifter Heidelin Diaz, pole vaulter EJ Obiena, gymnast Kaloy Yulo, and boxers Yumir Marshall, Irish Magno, Nesty Petesio, and Carlo Paalam. The Olympics qualification regatta will take place tomorrow until May 7. Gretchen Ho, We Are One News.
Two movie sequels will stage a comeback in theaters in a bid to revive the cinematic experience. Starting off with the animated comedy Peter Rabbit 2, The Runaway.
Did you miss me?
Now a family man, rabbit, rebellious Peter is still out for some mischief. He leaves their garden for some trouble. But is this really the kind of bunny he wants to be? With his loved ones already getting affected? Peter Rabbit 2 is slated for a June 18 theatrical release. From fun and games to horror and silence, A Quiet Place Part 2.
What happened?
A bomb, I think.
It follows the deadly events at the Abbott residence. Evelyn and her two children must stop lurking in the shadows and face the terror outside. As they venture into the unknown, that the sound-hunting creatures are not the only threats existent. A Quiet Place Part 2 will be in cinemas May 28. For News 5, MJ Marfori, We Are One News.
And kindness really does go a long way. That's precisely what happened to a 9-year-old Mangyan boy who gave out what little his family has. Meet Ornelo Dondon Sinagmayon, who donated a half sack of kamote or sweet potatoes from his family's small land to a community pantry in Occidental Mindoro. His story went viral on social media, especially since his family refused to get anything from the pantry in return. But his kindness had to be repaid in a big way. The pantry organizers, the Kilusang Nagmamalasakit sa Lalawigan, granted him full scholarship. Wow! His family also received food, cash, clothing, school supplies, and baby needs. A boy with a big heart given a chance at a brighter future. And that's the way to end the newscast, di ba?
Naman, oo. Pag kid talaga, no, parang you see it so genuine, so natural.
And kudos also to that organization that quickly understands, di ba? Parang nagbigay, napakalaking bagay, pero malaki pa rin yung pangangailangan ng bata.
I'm sure that kid will take that lesson with him until he grows up.
And I hope we all take that lesson.
Yes, for sure. Well, that wraps up today's big story. Catch us again tomorrow at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250.
Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. Mask on.
Wash hands.
And stay safe, Philippines. Ako po si Robbie Alampay.
At ako naman si Gretchen Ho. We are One News. Have a